Okay. Hello, everyone. Are you all right where you are? Does anyone want to move? Or are you all happy? You're all happy. Good. Hello. This is. I'm probably not going to talk about my book because that seems very arrogant. And so instead, I'm going to talk about why I love books. And this is because this bookshop is so fantastic, and it's so. And there's so many books that you might not see necessarily. I mean, this is one of the things that I love about independent bookshops as well. Is the fact that if you do look at the mainstream bookshops, they have pretty much the same thing, and very often their windows are actually just bought by a publisher, and so you don't have that same kind of experience, which you know that everyone who works here is really, they've all got books they love. Like I was down at a wonderful place in Bath called Mr. B's Emporium, and it is just beautiful. They've kind of got advisors there almost. If you're after a certain kind of book, so come and sit here and we'll discuss this genre, we'll find the right genre book for you. And when I was there, I was chatting, and I suddenly saw this book by a poet called Chen Chen, who I'd not come across before, and it just had a title I thought was such a fantastic title. But I thought, I must buy that book. And I went to the counter, and they went, "Oh my goodness, you bought that book? Oh, she's not going to believe it." Because everyone in Mr. B's, one of the things that they do is they choose different books, which other people go, "Oh, you'll never be able to sell that." And that had been, and it had only come in the week before, and everyone else had imagined that it was going to remain there for months on end. And then there was this tremendous kind of celebration of the fact, we didn't think anyone would buy it, but you were the one. And that is generally my life. Generally, I am the person who, we never thought anyone would buy that book, and then you turned up. Because I have no taste whatsoever, because I just love everything. So if I see an interesting title, if I see an interesting description of a book, if I see, I'll just see if there's anything that I've got. Well, in fact, I'll get to those in a minute. So one of the things that I love about books is I think that they are a great weapon of empathy. I think that we live in a culture and a society where an enormous amount of our news media, our mass media, and our social media are entirely focused on turning people into two dimensions or even less. And as we know as well, when you have particularly kind of I would say clumsy, mean-spirited and greedy governments, one of the things they'll do is they will try and turn smaller groups of people against each other while we ignore those who are actually feasting on us. And so this is like this book here. Has anyone here yet read Run Towards the Danger? Does anyone know this book? This is great, by the way. You're the smallest audience I've played to, so the likelihood of any of you putting your hand up is very, very slim. Yeah, Run Towards the Danger is by Sarah Polley, who some of you will know as an actor, some of you will know as a filmmaker, and some of you will know as both. And her new film, Women Talking, is meant to be absolutely remarkable. And I read this book. I was out in Canada. I'd had this kind of slightly negative experience initially. I'd started my tour of Canada with Brian Cox, and on the first day, I got COVID. And I was fine though. I just had the 2 stripes on the thing, but I wasn't ill or anything like that. I just had COVID, so I had to go into isolation in this quite nice hotel. So it was fine. And then this lovely thing happened because I was in Edmonton, because I was in Canada. Some of the people who'd been in the audience the night before had thought, why is it that Robin appeared on a screen and definitely appears to be in Edmonton, but he wasn't actually here? And they went, well, he must be ill. He must be isolating. We should do something about that. And so the next day, presents started to arrive at the hotel. They kind of worked out what hotel with someone who is interrupting a physicist, what would they be put in? That's kind of the most interrupting a physicist hotel we can think of. And first of all, from the local printers who kind of put together all the stuff, I received these books of astronauts and dinosaurs. And then the local We Book Inn, lovely bookshop called We Book Inn, they sent me a couple of Leonard Cohen books. And then the place that makes the gin sent some gin, and the place that makes the beer sent the beer. And I really wasn't particularly ill at all, because I had both of those and they were delicious. And then after that, I got a box of baked goods. It was a fabulous box of baked. There was a little lemon meringue pie there. There was a brownie, and then there was this wonderful biscuit which is called, I always mispronounce this, I think it's Nemoni bar and Mono bar. And they're a little biscuit which is kind of, the base of it is chocolatey, kind of mixed up with a little bit of broken biscuit or oats. And then in the middle is a mixture of custard and icing sugar. And then on the top is melted chocolate, right? And it's a fabulous looking biscuit. And it was made even more fabulous because there I was isolating and alone, and everyone else had gone off to Vancouver. And that biscuit is the biscuit that by chance was the biscuit my grandmother made every single Christmas. So she would come down around at Christmas and she would bring a little tin of those biscuits. So I had this wonderful kind of Proustian rush of a biscuit. Not merely were they delicious and highly sugared, but they took me into various Christmases, including the one where I pulled the cracker with my grandmother a little bit too hard, pulled her off the chair, and she broke her wrist. And but Stoke Mandeville Hospital on the Boxing Days, very jolly. And then this lovely thing happened when I was in Nottingham. Hello, come in, hi. When I was in Nottingham, at the Five Leaves bookstore, someone called Jerry, who comes to quite a few of my gigs, she went, I've made you some biscuits. And when I opened the box, she'd made those particular biscuits. And that kind of, to me, is a very typical thing you get from book people, whether in libraries or in bookshops, is a beautiful sense of generosity. The fact she'd obviously looked back at a blog post I'd written 7 months before, and she'd gone, those are the biscuits I'm going to work on all day. And so that's kind of what I really want to talk about tonight. Is I want to talk about love, kindness, generosity, and hope. And I think a bookshop like this is the perfect place to talk about that, because one of the things that we have to do, I think, if we are eventually going to, it's not always just the big marches and it's not always the yelling, it is that bit of reaching out to people. I remember a friend of mine who, in the 1970s, she was quite an activist, and she didn't get on with her dad. And she was explaining him on the car journey home from university how she was going to change the world. And he said, have you ever been round to the old woman who lives next door to you? And she went, oh, no, I haven't. I hated my dad for that because, one, I was furious with him, but two, he was entirely right. And so I think that thing of finding the ways of understanding people, there's nothing, someone told me this lovely story, which is, they said the difference between falling off a bar stool in London and falling off a bar stool in Dublin, sorry. If you fall off a bar stool in London, people go, ha, look at you, you fell off the stool, ha. If you do that in Dublin, someone goes, oh, God, that happened to me last week. And I think that is a beautiful thing. I think that little story alone is a great philosophy of, do you mock or do you reach out with a hand and kind of join and create a connection? And that's what I adore about bookshops and libraries, is all of the connections everywhere to minds and experiences which might be nothing like ours. Like this book that I picked up there by Sarah Polley. There's some incredible stories about her work, about the kind of misogyny that she's faced, about what it was like to be a child actor. And she tells this story in the book about when she was in Baron Munchausen, the Terry Gilliam film. She was 8 years old. And Terry Gilliam is a kind of bundle of fun guy, but also not necessarily the best person to be in charge of some of the biggest special effects, So here is an 8-year-old who things were exploding where they shouldn't explode. Here she was at one point, she was nearly drowned when there was an accident involving a horse. And years later, she wrote to Terry Gilliam. She saw he was making another film with a child actor and said, dear Terry, can I just tell you about what my experience was like? Because you might want to know this. Now you're directing another child. And he was kind of a little bit like, oh, well, we all had fun though, didn't we? And yeah. And a lot of people were kind of uncertain of Sarah's story until actually Eric Idle was the one who piped up and said, I was there on that set, and she was in genuine danger at times. And Sarah actually experienced post-traumatic stress disorder. And there's the story that I love, though, in that. So it tells you, the first thing she says is, just because someone is considered to be a genius, why do we have to then say that we will, oh, well, they're a little bit different to everyone else, so it doesn't matter how much damage they create because they make such beautiful art or whatever it might be. I've known lots of people with an enormous amount of talent who have also been remarkably generous as well. You don't have to be cruel just because, and it certainly should not think you're better than others. And she tells this story of making a film in Belgium where there was one effect. This was when she was an adult. There's a scene of a car crash. And at that point, there was an effect where flames would come towards the windscreen. And the director watched her and could see that she was a bit nervous about it. So he said, hang on, I'll tell you what, get out of the car. I'll sit where you would be sitting and we'll just do the effect. So you can just get that kind of sense of what it would be like. So they do that and he gets out and she goes, okay, great. And she gets back in. And then he says, you know what, you still look quite nervous. She went, look, everyone's here. It's fine. Everyone's here. Don't let anyone down. He went, yeah, sure. Everyone's here. But not everyone was in Baron Munchausen. And you know what? For some people, hopefully people are going to go and watch this film and some of them are really going to enjoy it and they'll remember it for a while. But for all of us, every single one of us in this room, we have this film and the experience of making this film forever. Let's find a different way of doing this. And that, to me, is the way that we should treat people. That is that way that there are very rarely experiences that there is no other way, that another way of thinking, of making it, of worrying about the fact that I've got a book somewhere in this pile which I'm going to recommend. One of the things that I found really fascinating, well, this again, actually, another book I'd recommend, I'm sure many of you know it. It was only about 100 metres from here that I saw Nanette for the first time, Hannah Gadsby's incredible show. It was the first night at the Edinburgh Festival, and the room was not that much bigger than this. It's about probably twice the size, maybe there were 100 people in there. And that experience was a remarkable experience. And of course, lots of people then start to go, yes, but is it really comedy? Which is one of those really pure, unstupid. Well, did people find it an absolutely amazing piece of work? Well, yes, they did. Yes, but was it really comedy? Oh, fuck that. I think this is, and I love the fact sometimes people say comedy doesn't change things, right? And it can. It might not change the world. It might not always bring down governments, but we know that dictators don't like jokes being made about them. But there's a wonderful book actually called, Hammer and Tickle. And it is all about the jokes that were told during Stalinist Russia about that period of time, and how jokes helped people get through, but also how jokes sometimes got them in trouble. There's a lovely joke about the difference between capitalist hell and communist hell. And the guy gets to hell and they go, right, okay, well, you've got two choices of hell. You've got capitalist hell or you've got communist hell. He goes, well, there's two hells. He goes, yeah. He goes, which one do you want? He goes, well, what's the difference? He goes, capitalist hell. Well, there are incredible knives that just suddenly shoot out of nowhere and they stab right through you. And after they've stabbed through you, suddenly boiling oil pours on top of you and you're scalded for almost eternity. And then ropes grab your wrists and they drag you and stretch you. And he goes, what about communist hell? He said, it was basically the same. He goes, oh, well, why would it go that? He goes, well, quite often the oil hasn't turned up in time and then the ropes haven't been made properly, so they break. And it's just a great way of getting through. But I love that. And I think, and I do think comedy changed things. I know people who changed because they saw Nanette. I know people, I think of my friend Grace Petrie, who is a wonderful singer and activist, and actually ended up supporting Hannah Gadsby on a tour she did a while ago. And she's a brilliant singer and musician. If you ever get a chance, if you don't know. How many of you know Grace Petrie? Excellent. Correct audience. She's just so great. She's such a good person. And I know that when she went to see this show, she left in tears. She was both broken by it, but also at the same time, it empowered her. And that's part of the thing that books do as well. Is books for everyone here who might be a bit of a weirdo and a freak, which I mean in the best possible way, because I've seen normal people and frankly, their conversations are dull. But when you're growing up, and when you are sometimes feeling that you are weird and you are strange and the way that your brain works, it doesn't seem to work like other people and you keep yourself in, that books are the place. Sometimes you go, I found someone in this book who's a bit like me. I found someone, I remember the first time of listening to Ivor Cutler, the wonderful poet Ivor Cutler, who I think it's his 100th birthday today. It might be his 100th birthday. I can't, but it's very good. And listening to him on the radio, and that the beautiful story about how to make a friend. I don't know if I would praise it about how to make a friend is basically you can make a friend by placing a tin of whitewash just on your windowsill, and when someone walks past you, knock it down and they get covered in the whitewash. You say, oh dear, I'm so sorry, please do come upstairs and you can have my bath. And then they get there and they get in the bath, and while they're in the bath you pick up their vest and you go, oh dear, there seems to be a hole in your vest, I must mend that hole for you. And then what you can use is cobbler's thread. That's what I always use, because that means that every time that person scratches at where that cobbler's thread, they remember you and they remember that you're their friend. And that, to me, listening to that kind of language, that kind of story. I remember when I saw him live in the Lyric Hammersmith, and most of the show was just an old man walking slowly between a harmonium and his poetry book. But it didn't matter. It was just like the suspense of it. There might be poetry or there might be a bit of harmonium playing, but that space in between was a beautiful space. And some of you know Ivor Cutler, he didn't like too much noise. And I remember that night they said, Ivor Cutler would like you to applaud. You probably know exactly what this percentage is. Is it about 72%, I think, of our normal level? It's around that. So Ivor Cutler would like you to applaud at 72% of your normal level, right? And the audience took it very, very seriously. Quite kind of, no, it's about 83%. No, that can only be about 53. We got to 72%. And then just as he got to the microphone, someone went, yay! And when that was rather wonderful, only spoiled at the end by the yay. And from that point onwards, we knew we were with someone else's. We were in a place which is, the importance. I mean, I've had an experience in the last few years, like many people, I think, during lockdown, where we were sometimes confronted by our minds, and sometimes we just spent a lot of our life descending into busyness. And then in that lockdown period, sometimes we couldn't escape from our mind in whatever way it was. And that was how an autistic stranger called Jamie got in contact with me and said, hello, I don't know if this is out of the blue, and I'm sorry if this is a weird question, but I'd really like to talk to you about the neurodivergent model. And that is exactly the kind of opening line I like in a conversation. It's like, how are you? How was your Christmas? How's Jean? That's a long way to fall, that kind of thing. I don't like those, but that question immediately lured me in. And I spoke to Jamie, and Jamie, after 3 hours of conversation to question, said, just so you know, pretty much every single answer you've given very strongly points to you kind of having an ADHD mind. And I don't know if anyone, I'm going to ask, but you don't feel under no pressure. Has anyone here recently, on the last couple of years, had any kind of if you're up for neurodivergent kind of experience or discussion about it? Can I ask you how, if it's okay, you don't need to. How much have you found it's changed with you?
Considerably. I was very late diagnosed at 59 with autism, ASD, and ADHD. And suddenly I discovered that I wasn't actually a freak. I was a very, very normal autistic person.
Yeah.
And I've met lots of other autistic people, and they're just like me, which I sort of knew, but I didn't know they were autistic. And it's opened up a lot of difference in the way that I do things. A lot of other things have happened in my life as well that have changed it. So I kind of, I'm not looking at life the same way that I did 12 years ago. It's one thing and another. It's a very different place.
I'm really glad to hear that, because I think there's so many people I've met recently, and of course, as we know, also diagnosis of autistic women is, it's only recently properly that this is, people have realised how many people have been missed, and I didn't realise. It's only in the last few years how many people are masking, how many people are hiding who they really are. I'm lucky in one way because I always had that chance to go out in front of audiences and show off, but I still had a very, very strong negative voice that would, Elaine, the number of times that I would come up from a gig, and if someone came up to me and say, oh, I really enjoyed that gig, I would explain to them why they hadn't enjoyed that gig, why it was actually a terrible mess of a gig, and I'd failed to do those things. And, most of my gigs, if you've ever seen me live, there's a lot of tangents. There's a lot, a classic example of something that would happen is someone coming up to me and saying, my husband and I have made a list, and here are the 19 stories that you began and did not finish this evening. We would like you to finish at least 6 of them to have some sense of closure, please, right? And I used to, and that day, Jamie got in contact with me. It was startling, because suddenly everything, I was 52 years old, and suddenly everything made sense. Suddenly the realization that the audience that I thought I'd been annoying year after year after year, even though they pretended to laugh, they hadn't been coming back going, the only reason we're coming back is hopefully this time there will be a narrative through line. The moment he delivers a straight narrative, then we're going to stop coming. Oh, God, it's been all over this. But that's actually why they came. They came because they didn't know what was going to happen. And yet I have not faced up to that. And my relationships with people, I don't know if you felt like this, one of the things that I have felt, and it feels, I don't know if this is a clunky way of saying it, but it actually feels that there's a really heavy, scratchy coat that I don't wear anymore. I feel genuinely lighter than I felt before. I have got so many, and it hasn't slowed me down in any way. It's sped me up, if anything. And I think there's so many people, and again, when it's because I've got a book here, which I've just started reading, recommended, in fact, by Jamie, who I mentioned, who does a great show called with Jamie and Lion, 1800 Seconds of Autism. Different, Not Less, by Chloe Hayden, who is basically, she's an Australian actor, and she's autistic, and this is just her kind of giving an introduction to people about, what I hope is that we'll one day live in a world where something like ADHD would not even be, and it wouldn't even come up, because we don't live in a world where normal is such a thin line, and that the moment that Brian Cox will often say to me, he'll just go, why are you so weird? That was a weird thing to say. And of course, I used to just kind of feel a bit, I don't know why. And now I just go, yeah, that's how my mind works. And it goes weird. And that's how I write books, and I make shows, and I do things with my lovely friend Josie. And I have no idea how both of us haven't worked out we were ADHD 20 years ago when we started working together, but eventually we did. And it just makes, and it gives you new language. It gives you new ways of communication. So I think that there will be lots of teenagers who will read Chloe Hayden's book and not go through what you've gone through, and not go what other people have gone through, and actually go, this is fine. Yeah, there's other minds, and this is what we need. And all, I mean, nearly, I would imagine almost all of these books, right? Certainly on that side there, those books there, they come from people who probably spent a lot of time at school being called weird and strange, and a lot of people who inside their head were like going, I don't really know what's going on. And that's so often where creativity comes from. So I love the existence of books like this. I love Rebecca Solnit. I'm going to mention that as well. I hope some of you have read, what's it called? Men Explain Things to Me. Have any of you read that book? Oh man, it's a joy. The essay Men Who, she's so great anyway. And I just, but Men Explain Things to Me starts off with a story about she's at a party and this man starts talking to her and going, I was recently reading an article in the New York Review of Books about the photographer Edward Murbridge. And a very interesting thing about him, actually, and he's kind of explaining how he knows so much about Edward Murbridge from reading this one particular article. And eventually Rebecca Solnit's friend says, well, you do know that that thing you've read was a review of Rebecca's book. And he goes, yeah. Anyway, so and he cannot believe, how could it be you who's written this book? And she, again, she just has such kind of passion and power and activism. Patti Smith, I always need to recommend anything by Patti Smith, because Patti Smith, again, that humanity that Patti Smith has, there are a few more beautiful things. If any of you saw where she went to collect Bob Dylan's Nobel Prize for Literature, did any of you see that? You're not right. So she's singing Hard Rain's Gonna Fall, as far as I remember. And in the second verse starts, and she's slightly out of place. She kind of, the sentence has gone a bit wrong. And the guitar player stops. And then she starts again, and she gets it slightly wrong again. And it just stops. And there's this incredible audience, you can imagine, of dignitaries and people in black tie. And she just goes, I'm sorry. I'm very nervous. It's the most beautiful moment. It's so much more beautiful than had the song been perfect. That moment doing that, it makes me well up every time that I watch it. And I really, when there's certain things which you just need to reinvigorate you. I find, for instance, watching Dick Van Dyke singing Chitty Chitty Bang Bang in a diner always makes me happier. The Chitty Bang Bang, Chitty Bang Bang. He's just, and I loved it in Mary Poppins. I didn't really like that recent Mary Poppins film, apart from Angela Lansbury. And when Dick Van Dyke turns up, the old guy, and now he really is the age of the old guy. It's just fantastic. Anyway, so right, what time is it? How long? Right, I'm gonna. I've got so much because it's quite an informal thing. I hope you don't mind. I'm just going to rattle on. I always rattle on. You know that. You've seen me before, but this one might be even more rattly than normal. I love just looking at books and going, this one must be mine. The example tonight is Dark Archives. Do you know this book? Yeah. Oh man, that's great. A librarian's investigation into the science and history of books found in human skin. Oh, Mike. Yes, I made that face when I looked at it as well. You're quite right. So I'll tell you a library story, one of my favourite library stories as well, because I've got in here, there's a new collection of Ursula Le Guin. I love Ursula Le Guin. There's a new collection from Silver Press called Space Chrome, and it's out there. I might even put it in a pile there, but it's out there and it's worth getting. And I wanted to show you one of my, because what I love about books is that also they don't just contain the story that's in them. They contain a lot between the lines. They contain a lot from, and it's something sometimes when people say, why have you got so many books? There's a thing like The Guardian did some silly article about, because a lot of people have too many books and it's rather snooty and middle class. And my Buddhist husband was explaining, hang on a minute, sorry, you're just talking about snooty middle class Guardian things. You've immediately gone, my Buddhist husband actually said 2 books. And it was a horrible article because I think of all the problems we're facing in the world, people having too many books is not, that pressing. And in fact, my friend Pragya Agarwal, who her book Hysterical is just up there, she was really cross about it because she said, well, I grew up in a house where we didn't have access to loads of books. And so when you are able to suddenly be surrounded by books, it's a beautiful thing to have. And there is also, and I think someone said about book collecting, they said, you don't say to someone who's a wine connoisseur, you've bought another bottle of red wine, but you haven't finished the last one. And there's a thing about being surrounded by books as well, which is, it's not just the words in the book. Looking around at what's here, there is just being slugged there by Holly McNeish, and there's Pragya's book, and there's Stacey Clare, and all of these things are, you feel the potential of those books. So even just when you're here, you think, oh, I wonder what's in there. It inspires you before you even got to the foreword or the introduction. And I also love with old books, I love finding things that are left behind. I adore finding one of my favorites, bus tickets, train tickets. I bought a Barbara Cartland book recently. I was in Dublin, and I'm not that interested in the work of Barbara Cartland, but when I opened this book in Kevin Gildee's brilliant Bookshop, a letter fell out. So now I had to buy it. And it was this letter, it was to Lily, and it just said, "Dear Lily, I'm so sorry to hear about what you've done to your leg. It sounds very, very painful. I hope it's feeling better, but I imagine it's not. I imagine the agony will go on for a very, very long time, which makes me so sad." And you just read and you think, oh, I see Betty Davis and Joan Crawford there. I see some real antagonism in that kind of relationship. So I had to buy the book for that. I buy books, a postcard. I love to find an old postcard. When I was in Westwood Books in Sedbergh, which is great, if you're ever near Oxenholme Lake District, go to Westwood Books. It has the most magnificent, just so. I was one of my favourite things that's happened on the tour, and not just this tour, in my life, is quite often I'm confused for someone who actually works in the bookshop, which I adore, and I don't give it away. I just because I normally know where the books are. So I was in a little bookshop in Gerrard's Cross down in Buckinghamshire, just outside London, and I finished my talk, and everyone had gone. I'm just browsing, and a woman came in and she went, "Hello, I wonder, I want some advice on a book about Paddington for my niece who lives in Perth." In Australia. I said, "Oh, right, I know which ones you want." And I took her over and I went, "That one there, I think would be really great. How do you say 5 years old?" "Yes, she's 5 years old. That would be lovely. It's got lots of pictures as well of kind of landmarks, and you can have a conversation with her and things on Zoom." She went, "Oh, that's absolutely perfect. That really is perfect. And do you know what? I've not seen you before. How long have you worked here?" I said, "Oh, I don't work here." She went, "What are you doing here then?" I said, "Well, I've got a book out and I was just doing a talk about Bookshop." "What's the book about?" I said, "Well, the current one actually is about kind of science, the nature of the universe, and to some extent our perception of time." And she went, "Oh, perception of time is something that fascinates me. I'll buy your book as well." And that's a very slow way of getting a bestseller, but I'm working at it. And so I love that thing. When I was in Sedbergh in Westwood Books, there was this beautiful thing where there was a woman looking at the death section, and she looked like she wanted something particular. I said, "You're looking at that?" I said, "Is there anything you particularly off?" She went, "Oh, I just want one about the kind of different traditions around the world." I went, "You want Caitlin Doughty's book?" She went, "You're right, I do. I don't suppose you know where the cannibalism section is, do you?" I said, "It's just over there, and I reckon you'll have the Ray Tannehill book already." But I've got the Ray Tannehill. "How did you know?" Anyway, so we had a lovely conversation. But one of the things that I loved when I was in Westwood was that we were talking about things that left in books. And Paul and Heather, who run it, said there was a woman called Nicole, and sadly Nicole died quite young, and they got all her books. And they said the beautiful thing was that in every book that Nicole had, she would write where she had found the book. And then on the first page, she would write where she was when she began the book. And on the last page, she would write where she was when she finished the book, and sometimes a little précis of the book. And I love things like that that are left behind, because that is part of that human left behind, that person who may well no longer be living, but some of the ghost of them is there. Because though I don't believe in ghosts as in that kind of sheety wall ghost, I do think everywhere has ghosts, the ghosts that are created by our imagination. You know, you read this again is why I love books and why I love stories so much, is that everywhere Edinburgh is a very obvious example of the fact that you walk around here and you can feel a weight of stories around you. But everywhere becomes that. You know, when I was in Wolverhampton and someone said to me, "You were the only person on the panel today who said anything nice about Wolverhampton," I said, "I really like Wolverhampton, and I love Hull, and I love all of these places," because once you start finding a little bit about them, once you go down one of the alleys, once you find an odd pub, once you find some of the things that are hanging in the local art gallery, then you find all of the different stories. You find stories like Wolverhampton was one of the, I think it was actually the first gallery in the United Kingdom that realised that pop art wasn't just a fad, that it really was a proper movement in art. And that's where I discovered a woman called Pauline Boty. Do any of you know Pauline Boty? Pauline Boty, for those you don't know, she was a pop artist, and like so many female artists, was then forgotten. And so she died very young, sadly, and her work was magnificent. She does appear briefly in the Michael Caine film Alfie. She's also in a documentary about pop art with that Ken Russell made called Pop Goes the Easel. But apart from that, she's not really remembered. But the Wolverhampton Art Gallery, they were going through their stores and they went, "Aren't these beautiful pieces of work? We should get someone to write a biography of her." And so now there's this excellent biography, beautifully illustrated. And also there's an interview with Nell Dunn, who amongst other things wrote Paul Cow and Steaming, the play Steaming. She did her first book, I think it was her first book, or one of the first, just called Talking to Women, came out in 1965. Edna O'Brien amongst others, some women who were quite well known, other people who were women who had what we might just call, a very like the average kind of life. And Pauline Boty is the first interview. And I really, if you can get hold of Nell Dunn's talking to women, and you think, how could this person have been forgotten? And that's why I think, you know, when sometimes people go, I'm very worried that all our culture has been stolen because of this Roald Dahl thing. I actually got asked this recently. And I said, I'm not worried about the change of words in Roald Dahl. I'm not worried about, you know, Augustus Gloop going from fat to enormous, though my fat friend Andre, and I call him my fat friend Andre because that's what he calls himself, he went, I'm fat, and I'd rather be called fat than enormous. So it is an odd change, I think. And when this person asked this, I said, the thing I worry about is not occasional changes to the words of Roald Dahl, which I think have predominantly been done for the purposes of capitalism rather than sensitivity anyway. I worry about all the stories that are getting lost all the time. I worry about, you know, there's when someone talks about the fact where they'll say, oh, well, you know, I think it was in the Telegraph, which is not always reliable. And in the Telegraph, there was this publisher, person who'd been involved in the book industry, said, I do worry that sometimes due to diversity, we won't find the next John Grisham. It's got a mixture of responses, including some cheering. And I thought that's entirely the wrong way around to look at it. Because the right way around to look at that is, have we missed the next John Grisham because the next John Grisham was a woman or black or trans or whatever it might be? And that's the real, you know, there are now so many, like when Giles Corran goes, I mean, you can't really get published now as a white man, where one, you can, but yeah, there is more competition. And there should be more competition, because this is the thing, is when we have stories from a greater variety of people, when you have books like Dark Emu, which is a magnificent book about the indigenous people of Australia and how so much of actually their scientific acumen, their astronomy, their stories, their agriculture have been erased. And you read that book, and by reading that book, Australia looks different again. It's a great story to have. You know, we need stories from so many different minds. But anyway, I was mentioning Ursula Le Guin some hours ago. And this is, I love this book because, one, as I said, I love Ursula Le Guin, but two, I love it because this is the first edition of the Earthsea trilogy in one volume. And I think pristine, it's worth about 350 to 100 pounds. This isn't a pristine copy, though. This is an ex-library copy that I bought in my favourite charity shop in England called Unsold in Shore-by-Sea. Do go there. It's excellent. They have very spooky mannequins and they know it. And what I love about this book is, though it's not pristine, it's much better than a pristine copy because it is an ex-library copy and it has all of those date stamps. So every single one of those date stamps is a story of someone's victory, because this was almost never on the shelf. It's the story of the moment that finally someone went, it's in, and they got it, and they put their card, you know, they hand over, they can only take 4 books out. Oh my God, this is going to be one of them. And then you can imagine them sitting on the train, and maybe there's been a points failure at West Croydon or whatever it might be, and everyone else is just stuck there rereading Dempster's Diary in the Daily Mail over and over again. There they are, riding dragons with Ursula Le Guin. And I love that. And when I showed this book when I was in Colchester, another kind of small room, about 20 people there. And one woman said, did you say that was from your library? I said, I did say it was from your library. She went, oh, that was my library when I was a child. Can I have a look? And she looked there and she went, I think my date stamp is the 16th of December, 1977, but it might have been the 28th. And then she said, just so you know, my hamster sat on it, which I just thought was just such a lovely thing to have. So that's, you know, that's kind of that's just a starting point. I mean, I never, by the way, I never actually talk about the book. I do apologise. I went to 104 bookshops, had a lot of adventures, and then I wrote the book. There we go. That's the book done. So who would like to ask anything? Anyone got a question? I know there's not many of you, but please put yes.
How do we get the kind people of the world, we're not that many, to be kind to themselves? People like your niece are always giving of ourselves. How do we get them to be kind to themselves?
Yeah.
So we carry on being kind to others. And the other one is, how do we show our love of libraries and support?
Well, that is an important thing. I think the love of libraries is really important. I think it is to use your library. It is, if you have ideas, if you've met someone you think that person would be a great person to do a library talk, or you met an author or whatever it may be, then say to the library, oh, you know someone who's up for going to libraries? You know, that's kind of one of the things that I love doing. I think it's to try and make sure there's as many events, as many ways of drawing people in. It's important to tell people that a library is not just a storeroom for books. A library is very often also a place where, you know, well, I mean, sadly now it's also a place where people go to keep warm due to that which is an utterly preposterous thing, but it is true. And it's also a place where older people sometimes go, and there's just a sense of community when they might be sitting alone at home. And there's the books and magazines they might not be able to afford. And you have refugee groups who gather there because they can't afford to go and use a cafe, and all of the children there excited by reading. So I think it's to get the message out there that a library is not just a bunch of books, that it's a very active place. In terms of kindness, I think it is, we have to get rid of our kind of, individually, this is up to everyone, but that again, that kind of, that banter culture, which is, and not be scared about saying to someone what a wonderful thing you did, and that's lovely, and that kind of, because I think that that's one of the, I mean, I'll do a poem at the end which is kind of about that to some extent, and it's just, I think that to me is the important thing, which is the older I've got, and I think it's been helped a great deal as well with the diagnosis amongst other things. I try. There's just these moments where if everyone is scared, and that's very useful. It's very useful for everyone to be scared. But every now and again, you have that moment. Like I was on a train to Sheffield, and there was someone who couldn't get their bag out of the rack because loads of other bags had been stacked there. And so I said, "Oh, do you need some help?" And I got her bag out, and then we went to the door because we were both getting off. And she said, "Oh, what's that badge you've got on?" And it was a badge of the artwork of someone called Cressida Campbell. I said, "Oh, it's Cressida Campbell." And she's really cool. She's a really fascinating woman. I was out in Canberra, and I saw this exhibition and the way that she looks at nature and flowers. And I said, "Oh, where are you going?" She said, "Oh, I've just left university. I'm on my first day. And I'm going up to Grimsby where I'm going to work." And I remembered the kind of thing I'd seen in Grimsby that was quite interesting. So I said, "Oh, there's also a really nice cafe there." And we just had a 5-minute conversation. And then when we got off the train, I could sense that both of us like going, "That was nice." It's just nice to have a bit of communication. And I think so many of the connections get spliced. There's so much fear. And the moment that you were able to break, and I am, because I've lost some of my anxiety, both to understanding myself and through prescriptions. But because of that, I will have, I still judge the situation. There's certain things, I see someone reading a book and I see the position they're in, and I think actually I won't go for them because they might feel a level of threat. But other times, like when I was in Bristol a couple of weekends ago at the Old Vic, there's a huge library, not huge, little library of books. And someone was near one of my favourite books. It's called Stay With Me by Ayobami Adebayo. It's absolutely fantastic. That's the interesting thing as well about a mistake that is made, which is when we believe that there are specific stories for us. And this is what annoyed me. I went to Dawn Books in Marylebone, and I decided to get a copy of Stay With Me for a friend of mine. And I said, "Have you got Stay With Me?" And they said, "Yes, it's in the African section." I said, "Why is it in the African section?" I said, "It should just be in novels." I said, "Maybe have another copy there." But immediately you've said, this isn't a story for you unless you're and it's such a beautiful, and I think that bit of one of the things that books do is that they help you kind of punch holes through your reality time. And it's like, going to art that you're not sure that you're necessarily going to like. A lovely, if you've not seen it yet, I think it ends tomorrow. Have any of you seen Gleam at the City Gallery? It's so great. It's such a good, and it's a lot of female filmmakers and photographers who, in particular, around the islands at the beginning of the 20th century and up to about the 1950s, about their work, about their kind of, the views of that society. There's a beautiful shot of this woman who looks like the most powerful human you've ever seen, holding an enormous fish over her small cat on stone steps, and it's just fantastic. But yeah, so this is not answering your question anymore, but I didn't know if there'd be a second question from anyone else, so I'm just going. And but it is, yeah. And so I think that's one of the things is to try and have not a fearlessness, because like I said, I think you have to, but at the same time a friendliness, and to be open to as much as possible, because it really does. I'm so fascinated by, over the years, of different things that as I've tried to be, well, not even try, I think, just more open in the shows that I do and the people that I meet, and that leads to you getting more stories, and that leads to people coming up to you and talking about their own situations. When I wrote about in one of my books, I'm a Joker, So Are You, I wrote about a car accident I was in when I was a child, and my mum was severely injured, and she was in a coma. And when she came out of the coma, she didn't know any of us existed because she'd woken up as an 18-year-old, not a 32-year-old. And I'd always thought the accident was my fault because I was 3. And when you're 3, if you're doing something, like if I was picking this book up and the book's over there fell over, a 3-year-old thinks, "Oh my God, I did that." I'd never written it down, and I didn't really want to put it in the book. It felt like such a boring story, because that's the thing about us as well. I think everyone has stories, but we think our stories are boring stories because we've carried them with us for so long. And I wrote this down, and the effect it's had on my family, the effect it has had on me, the effect that people coming up to me, sometimes in tears with the memory they had, of just saying it's okay and just opening those things up. And I think that's another thing, which is you can, like Lem Cisse's book, My Name is Why, has it's a wonderful book, and I would really, I've two books from a couple of years ago that I really recommend very highly. Kerry Hudson's Lowborn and Lem Cisse's My Name is Why, and I put them together because they're both books that you want to walk into the pages and you want to stop the events that are going on when you see what's happening to the children in those books. And one story that hit me very, very hard when I was reading that was Lem. If you don't know the story, Lem was basically, he was fostered, and then when he was 12, he was sent away from his foster family because apparently they didn't really like bringing up teenagers, so they would foster people till they were 12, which seems to me to have a tremendous cruelty to it. And when Lem was sent away, he was sat in the back of the car that his care worker was driving, and obviously he was thinking, what have I done wrong? He said, oh, I must have done, I don't know what it is because they've sent me away, haven't they? So I must have done something bad, and I don't know what it is that I've done bad. And his care worker had the presence of mind just to pull the car over and stop, and he just said, Lem, this is very important. You haven't done anything wrong. And I think the power of that moment of what he did is just, and that's one of the things, again, Lem is someone who spends a lot of time working with people who've been through the care system. And Lem is a voice for so many people. And I would imagine there are people, not really through the care system, but also in other ways they've been brought up, that when they read Lem's story and he read that moment of going, it wasn't your fault, that might have lightened them so much and made them. And so that is why, I just think all of these stories around here, there's just so much here that can change you. Yes.
I, for years, thought that it was my fault, and I never shared that with my mom or my dad. Yeah, so it's amazing how much you associate events with something that you think you shouldn't have done.
Yeah.
Because I would put my own back to the guy, I should not do it. And there's that guilt associated with it.
I think that's such an important thing, isn't it? That trying to create an openness. Yeah, because I think in so many families, I mean, my dad said when he read the book, and I wish he hadn't read it, I didn't really want it to, that thing that we share things with strangers, and sometimes with our family, we keep very quiet. And he rang me up, and I knew he was trying to hold something back, but once and he just said, I wish you told me that you thought it was your fault, because then I could have done something about it. And I said, Dad, there was nothing you could have done. You stood by all of us during the most difficult time, and I would not have had the language or the knowledge to share that. But trying to find that situation, like with my son the other day, had a parents' evening thing, and he did very well. And I was really I'm not happy with him anyway. I wouldn't get bad. I decided just to, there was one little thing that worried me slightly about how much fun he was having at school. It was about break time. I probably shouldn't tell you this story, but anyway, he talks quite a lot. I don't know where it is from my wife. And sometimes he starts answering exam questions before he's read the whole thing. So it definitely comes from my wife. And but he said, oh, I just like joining in and talking in class because I don't talk that much in break. And so I wrote him a letter saying how pleased I was and what a great kid he was and all that kind of stuff. And then I just said, this might be bunkum, but I was just slightly worried, about break, and maybe everything's fine. And he just sent me a text. He said, oh, it's fine, Dad. It's just no one talks about anything interesting. So it's like, yeah, but I just wanted, and the more that, sometimes I do these talks and I forget that I need to make sure that I always put them into action myself and make that space. I mean, again, the diagnosis thing, I think it's really helped all my family relationships on every level, because we're able to talk a little, because if you're hiding, it's, I think one of the biggest difficulties of certainly being human, I think it's, around the world, I think sometimes the UK is, I think it's worse in England than Scotland, but you may disagree with me, but that disparity between who you are pretending to be or what you think you're meant to be and who you might be on the inside. And if that disparity is too great, that leads to so much unhappiness. And that bit of just going, that's hopefully that bit, this is what I am, and that's great. Would anyone else like to ask any comments? I know I have to put that right. I'm going to show you some of the books then. I'm going to show you this because this is one of the things. Inscriptions. I was mentioning about things found in books. Like one of my favourite ones was recently. My dad's 92, And one of the things, he can't really get out anymore. So one of the things I do is I browse for him. And when I was in Carlisle the other day, I found a book about the actor Robert Donat, who was in Goodbye Mr. Chips and 39 Steps, amongst others. And I knew he liked Robert, and I thought, my dad's got that. So I'll ring up and go, hello, Dad. I've just read a book about Robert Donat. I don't think you've got it. I've got that book, and I'll bring it for you. And it's just that little bit so I can bring it to the shelf a certain way. And it's also, I think, how we talk about love. Because my dad being born in 1930 and his mother was born in 1890, so kind of, love being talked about amongst men is a very limited thing. But I think even if you're uncomfortable with doing that, you can find a language, and our language is books. When I see my dad next week, I'll say, here's that Robert Donat book that I told about. Well, that's very good. Lovely picture on the back of Robert Donat. He really did read poetry wonderfully. He did read poetry wonderfully, didn't his father? They often said he wasn't reading poetry, he was the poet. They did say that, you're quite right. And anyway, thanks very much for finding that book, and thank you for thinking about me. That's absolutely fine, goodbye. And then actually what you're saying is, I love you, and I love you, and that's what's going on. So I think, there's different ways that we can kind of do some of that coding. And I found a book, we're trying to thin the books out a little bit, because he's got, and I was going through books. I said, that reference books, you've got loads of those reference books. And he went, yeah, let's get rid of those. And then I found one old novel, and they're from this series called Angelique. You ever heard of Angelique? Apparently they were really big in the 1950s and then almost entirely forgotten. They're those ones where an attractive blonde woman falls in love with an untrustworthy duke. Those kind of books, right? And I pulled that out and I thought, oh, Dad won't want that anymore. But then I opened it, and it was the present that he'd given my mum on their first wedding anniversary. So it's like that book is not going. And that book, when I do have to have that awful moment when he's no longer with us, and I have to start going through the books and finding which book contains the most of him. What are those? It's like someone asked me recently about which book, if I could only save one book, what book would I save? And I went through, no, that one, no, that one. And then eventually I realized what it was. And it's my mum's copy of The Little Prince, because she had that when she was 5 years old. And it's got no real, and I read it at a funeral and stuff, but it has no real markings on it except one. She was very good for a 5-year-old. But there's one picture in The Little Prince of a snake strangling what I would describe as an unsurfed mammal, right? And so it's strangling it. And my mum, when she was 5, must have gone, oh no, I don't want the snake to do that to animal, and just tried to cross out the snake. And so that little bit of her, I think, is a really beautiful thing to have. This copy here, Galaxies and Quasars, which I picked up in October Books in Southampton. And I didn't pick it up for the Galaxy and Quasar information. It's 45 years old, so some of it is no longer relevant. It's still quite a nice book. There's some nice pictures and some interesting graphs in there. But it has this at the front. It has the inscription. It just says, to Mammy, from a quarrelsome and recalcitrant, if not positively contrary offspring, in gratitude for all your efforts before and after and during the 27th of August, 1981. If I do not lay the world at your feet, it is because I send you galaxies and quasars with love. And so I put that in the Bibliomaniac book in the hope that maybe someone will read that book and they'll go, oh, I know what that was, and then I can pass it back to them. This is the book that I just picked this up recently. It's a biography of Leonora Carrington, the great surrealist author and painter. And sometimes you pick up a book, there's only one sentence in it. The first sentence you see, you go, I have to have this book, even if this is the only great sentence. I picked up a rubbish book the other day, one of those old pan kind of, again, pulpy books. It was called Carol. Carol is a French woman who knows about everything except love, and she meets an American man who knows about nothing except love, and blah, 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 blah. But I opened the book and it just said, she kissed the potato and threw it to him. So I needed that book. That's the only book I've got. And this though has such a line, which again, some of the things I was talking about earlier, and I think it sums them up. To those who live in emotional poverty, other people's happiness can be perceived as a threat. And I think that's a good thing to hold on to in terms of our understanding sometimes. I love things like this as well. This is cooking for 2 or 20, but not in between. It's no good for cooking for 5 or 17. It's from the Walls Sausage Company. And I love the existence of this book because, again, it has a little social history in it. Even though, it was just a check, it smells a lot as well. It's got that real book smell. There's in the Notting Hill Book Exchange, there used to be a sign above the shelves which just went, please do not smell the books until you've taken them home. But there we go. Just that's just some pre-packaged pies near a jelly. I just love the existence of that book. I think it's just so great. This one I had to buy in the Oxfam in Glasgow because this is what's it? Travel to Distant Worlds, a 1957 book from Russia about how we're going to go and live on Mars. And I love reading about the future when it's now in the past. So that's one of my favourite kind of things. This is I don't know anything. Does anyone know this book? Green Girl by Kate Tambrino. I don't know if it's well known or not. I just found it. I found it in an Oxfam in where was I? Bramall last Friday, and it was fun. I was looking at the Oxfam, I found loads of different things, and then I found a copy of one of my books. And I said, "Oh, do you want me to sign the book?" So I just, I'm quite happy to sign it. And they went, "Oh yeah, please." And then I opened it and I went, "It's signed already. It's signed to Martin and has a lovely message involving the Carl Sagan quote." And so I just wrote up in the corner, "Here is the second part of the signed book. I hope you, Oxfam buyer, enjoy this book more than Martin." Right? And then that night, I looked out at the audience. I went, "Is anyone here called Martin?" And the man sat right by me. He went, "I'm Martin." I went, "Martin, did you give my book to Oxfam?" And he went, "Yes, I did." And so when I signed this book this time, I actually went, "I hope you enjoyed this one more than the last one." And then in the corner, I just put Oxfam, $6.99, and save them time. But this is, I just bought this for one reason. It mentions that it's a little bit like Jean Rhys, and that's all I needed. And then there's one quote from Jean Rhys taken from Good Morning Midnight, which is one of my favourite novels of all time. And I'll just see if I can find it's such a great line. "Today I must be very careful. Today I have left my armour at home." What a great line that is. So, but it's also a really interesting book, and I'm thoroughly enjoying it. I'm going to mention this because I don't know if they've got any copies of this. The last time I was here, I was given this book. And it's got, I don't know if they've got any copies. Undrowned. It's so great. Black Feminist Lessons from Sea Mammals. And that's exactly what it is. If you think, well, what does the title mean? It means it's Black Feminist Lessons from Sea Mammals. And it's basically Alexis Pauline Gumbs who wrote the book. It's a poet. She became fascinated in whales and dolphins, and she started an Instagram account, and she, put up all these pictures of whales and dolphins. And then she started realizing that the way that the lives of the whales and dolphins have been interpreted, that the names that have been given, that all of these things were a reminder of who was most dominant in society, and the way that, again, that punching through and making holes in our reality time. But there's this one line, which, again, was the reason that I thought I'm going to read the whole of this book and I'm going to adore it. But early on, she says, "Who is this book for? This book is for you. Also known as everyone who knows that a world where queer, black, feminine folks are living their most abundant, expressed, and loving lives is a world where everyone is free." So that's just a great line. I just love that. And it's such a lovely book. And the trouble is, I've been banging on about it loads, and no one seems to have it at all. So if there's one copy here, grab it, because that's the only place so far in the UK that's got it. And I keep saying to the publisher, they must reprint it. I'll show you one. Oh, God, I've actually got Carol here. I didn't know that was in the bag. Carol by Charles Frank. I'll give you the Carol, young, French, enchanting in body, blasé in everything except love. Robert, who set out to teach her, but was tormented when she would not conform to pattern. So there we go. This is the book I'll just quickly show you, which is, it's not needed so much talking here, but some of the places that I go to, I look at the audience and I think I'm just going to sneak in a couple of things that I'm not entirely certain whether the audience, and so I try as much as possible to kind of sometimes just sneak in a bit of stuff about the trans community and about some of the dehumanization that's gone on, towards the trans community, it's like the other day I was doing a gig in Tiverton, and they warned me. They said, "Just so you know, sometimes some of our audience might be quite right wing. Most of them are." I said, "It's fine. I do what I do, and we'll see how it goes. And I always go off on tangents, and whatever happens, happens." And then there were 4 women in their 80s who were sat there, and every now and again I kind of looked towards them. And they're the ones going, "Well, this isn't like when he's on Radio 4, an awful Trotskyist," So I was kind of, but I try never to prejudge people, right? So I didn't judge them. I just thought, actually, I think they're happy. And then, of course, I was signing books afterwards, and one of the women comes up to me and she goes, "It's so funny, it really is, because I've spent most of my life living in the East End of London. I had a family and I was married and all that kind of thing. It took coming down to Devon to realise I was a lesbian." And it's, again, this is why you should never prejudge, So And the book I was mentioning, actually, I haven't got it in at the moment, unfortunately. Lewis Hancock's Welcome to St. Hell, really good comic book about Lewis growing up as a trans man in St. Helens, which I highly recommend. But this book that I often talk about, it's one of my favourite things. This is Jenny Lives with Eric and Martin, which you'll find mentioned in a few. Matthew Todd's book actually covers this. If any of you are old enough to remember section 28, right, when that came in, this was the central plank of the argument that we must stop the promotion of homosexuality amongst children, because you know what happens. You mention homosexuality, and then they all, it's exactly the same in history. This is why in the 80s they banned the teaching of the English Civil War, because all the children turned into roundheads. But it's this book was in the Mail, Express, the Times, the Telegraph, the Sun, all of them. And it was just go, this filthy piece of pornography, every single child has it. It's all in fact. In fact, they didn't. There was one copy in the Inner London Education Authority's Central Library of Teachers' Resources. And that's why one of the reasons I bought this book. I thought, oh God, couldn't believe I'd actually found it. And it was in the glass cabinet in Oxfam, which stores that. Do I dare look at the glass cabinet in Oxfam and have a sneaking look? Oh dear, I need all the things, right? And it's only a little 50 kids book, and I bought it for 20 quid. And I have no idea how much it's worth. Of course, it is worth 20 quid. It currently goes for £500. Yeah, I know, it's crazy, isn't it? And that is, and it is this, that's, by the way, as seedy as it gets. And that requires a stretch of imagination. Why has he got a clothes peg in his mouth? Is it sadomasochistic drying of linen? I think he's just using it to carry the clothes peg, but you go wherever you want, Miss Baker. And the thing that I love is right at the end, there is a little summary of all the intentions of the book in cartoon form. Here are Bill and Fred. I love you, Fred. I love you too, Bill. Why don't we move in together? That's a good idea. Uh-oh, here comes grumpy Mrs. Jones. Oh no, what is this? Two men cannot live together. It is very wrong. But we really love each other. Why is it wrong? It just is. Anyway, my husband would never kiss another man. Ready for a twist, Lighthouse Bookshop? Because here comes Mr. Jones, and he's been keeping a secret. Now, that's not quite right, dear. When I was young, I was young, and we lived together. Then I met you, and it was you I loved most, and you loved me most, so we moved in together and got married. But goodness, why didn't you ever tell me that? I always thought it was wrong when two men love each other. There are so many things people think are wrong. It can never be wrong to live with someone you're fond of. I suppose that's right. I never thought of it that way. I'm sorry. You must forgive me. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. So there we are. That's the end of the pornography. Would anyone else like to ask any questions at all? Or are you all okay? It's not big enough. It literally is. It's a pretty small terrace house in a small town, and it is just. If I remove the book, I think the whole thing would fall down. I think most of it is. So it's like, yeah, between my wife, my son, and me, it is a ridiculous chaos. And someone once said, "How many books you got?" So I have no idea. All I can say is I donated 3,000 books to a prison library, and if you come to my house the next day, you go, "You've got too many books," and I can't stop it because I've made this rod for my own back, right? Which is, what do I now spend a lot of time doing? Visiting bookshops to talk about the book, which I wrote about touring bookshops, because I promised the bookshops that I'd come back when I wrote the book, not when I was going to write a book the next month. So now I'm immediately back there, and then I'm hoping to write a book about visiting bookshops, about when I visited them, because I've done a book about bookshops. So it's just going to go on and on and on. I can see that we're at the end time now. Not the end time, I mean, just for this event, right, just in case. But the shrug there suggesting maybe we really are. Thanks very much for coming down. So I love this bookshop. I love all the bookshops I go to, but everyone has something different and something special. And I just think, you look around here, and again, it's just all of this potential that is there, and I think it's wonderful. So thanks very much. If anyone wants a book signed, I'll sign a book. If you don't want a book sign, I'll just sign your hand or anything, like your eyelid or something. But I have to sign something, and then I'm going to go and have a drink. Thank you. I'll put the books out that I was recommending as well, just in case you think that they. Most of them